theme is external intervention and political change. And we have Michelle Avrutin from the George Washington University. Thank you so much for coming all this way. And I'll let the students introduce their topics. We also have Allison Smith, again joining us all the way from Beloit University, which is where my daughter attended, and Adam Smith, homegrown right here at Drake University. So we'll go in the same order that I introduced you, and when she's able to join us, Megan Straight from Drake University will be the fourth member of our panel. So, please, Michelle.
Okay. I guess, hi everyone, I'm Michelle, as you guys all know. I'm going to be presenting on Ukraine and the possibilities of its accession into the European Union. I do have a presentation.
And did you want the remote, or do you want to?
Yes.
Actually, the remote. Okay,
there you go. Great. Okay, apparently there's a lot of fun there. Okay, good morning. So hope you all had a wonderful morning already. Today we're going to be talking about tearing open the possibilities for Ukraine. Little pun, tearing open. All right. Sorry, just wanted to bring you guys up in a week, you know. All right, so I guess I will start off. So every day the newspapers have another story, something else that's kind of going on. And, you know, we read about it in newspapers, in between Starbucks coffee dates, or, you know, friends, and writing our paper, studying for our exams. And obviously around the world, something is going on. Something is happening. There's suffering. There's war. There's, you know, there's just a lot going on. And I think that one of the situations that had been going on for quite a while, and I feel recently has been a little bit more quiet, is the Crimea situation. There's still a lot of human rights violations, there's still a lot of suffering. I have family in the area, so it is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. So today we're going to be talking about its possibility of joining the EU. Just to keep in mind, I wrote this paper about a year ago when Russia hadn't annexed Ukraine yet, but we will obviously rectify those differences. So, this is my argument. So, given the structural nature of the European Union and benefits provided to post-Soviet countries such as Latvia, it would be beneficial for an economically, politically, and socially crippled country such as Ukraine to progress on the path to EU accession, despite current outside influencing factors such as Russia. So, essentially, I'll be making the argument that because Latvia and Ukraine have a lot of the similar social, political, and economical factors, that it's possible for Ukraine to also essentially copy the path that Latvia did on its way to the EU. So I'll start with a discussion of Latvia and its situation before its accession. Then I'll talk about generally what happens to a country when it goes into EU membership, what does the accession process look like, what is the Copenhagen criteria, and what pushes the countries to get through this. Then I'll talk about how the EU affected Latvia, and then we'll kind of trickle into the idea of how can we apply this to Ukraine. Why is this important? And then we'll have time for questions. So, Latvia. So Latvia was a country with poor infrastructure, low urbanization, a lot of inflation, a lot of economic problems. They essentially had a really corrupt government. Their education system was in shambles because at first it was considered a Sovietized education system because it was the Soviet Union was essentially dictating what was going to be taught, and then shortly after, Latvia had the decision-making power once the Soviet Union fell, and so Latvia was very interested in promoting Latvian values. So essentially, first they learned about the Soviet Union's history, then they learned about Latvian's history, so they didn't really exactly have any idea of globalization or, I guess, just history in general. And then there's also the political instability and a lot of ethnic division. So there was the Russians and the Latvians, and there was a lot of conflict between the two groups. I'm sure you can imagine. So this is just, so this is the agricultural productivity, I guess we're gonna say. Latvia at this time was a very agriculturally dependent country. So I'm sure as you can imagine, an agriculturally dependent country should have to be having numbers that look like that. It's in the negatives, negative 10.9. So it was not in a good place before I had started the accession process. So what happens? The EU enters. What goes on? So the Copenhagen criteria had four, I guess I'm going to call them requirements before a country can begin the accession process into the European Union. They had to have stable democratic institutions, respect for the rule of law, human rights, and respect for minorities. Most of the countries that entered the EU, or a good number of them during this time, did not have all these four requirements. So the Copenhagen criteria essentially encouraged these countries to develop these things before they could ascend into the EU. So the Copenhagen criteria generally gives free travel, funds for development, increases labor mobility, educational opportunities, free movement of goods and services. So it kind of sets up countries to begin their accession into the EU and become part of this Europe dialogue, global dialogue. So the general benefits of the EU, you get higher aggregate trade. I mean, you have now, I guess we're going to call them brothers and sisters of other countries that you can directly interact with. You have higher economic growth. The EU helps you in achieving political stability, which is really important in this case in Latvia. It also encourages human rights, which unfortunately Latvia didn't exactly have a lot of time with the Soviet Union moving over its country to develop these things. And so once the EU started to begin this accession negotiation with Latvia, a lot of these things had to be underlined and had to be helped. Latvia got the protection of human rights. They got minority rights. They had a stronger educational system. No longer was it specifically Latvian or specifically Russian. It was now a blend of everything, kind of what we learned today. And then their overall GDP jumped from 6.5% to 8.7% once they ascended into the EU. So this is, I think, a very important factor because a country needs to increase its GDP. Before we get to that, kind of give it away. So the only one of the concerns that I actually came across in my research was that Latvia's economy went through a pretty difficult time shortly after they accepted the euro. And after looking into this and not really understanding why, I realized that due to the trends at the time, Latvia's economy was already kind of not in a good place, and so by the time they had ascended into the EU and accepted the euro, which was, I think, not too long ago, an exception of euro, that just happened. All right, there we go again. So then we have Putin introducing Ukraine. Small political joke to lighten up your morning. Okay, so here's the situation in Ukraine. There's the East and the West. The East, so we'll start with the West because we're here. The West is not Russified. They never perceived the Soviet Union as their country. They're very down, I guess, homegrown Ukrainian people. They don't want the Russian influence there. They really just want to be Ukraine. They unfortunately do have certain biases against the Russian because of everything that has been happening and because of history. There's also the East, which is more positive towards Russia. They're mostly Russian-speaking. They definitely want Russia to come in. They were the ones that were for the annexation of Russia, for Ukraine people for Crimea. So they're right. Okay, so these are some of the facts of Ukraine leading up to the talks of their accession. They had a ridiculous dependence on Russia for oil. They had the Orange Revolution, which will be talked about later, which was essentially a political division. And during this time, it was when a lot of the Ukrainian people stood up and said, we do want to join the EU, we are pro-democracy. So the Orange Revolution is essentially a peaceful, I think it was about a 17-day demonstration, where they pushed to have the votes recounted and to push for the more pro-European candidate. They had national security issues, and the Maidan is, the Independence Square where they had a lot of the demonstrations happening. So Ukraine had a lot of social and political issues. They had ethnic divisions, they had the Russians and the Ukraine people, but in this case they were more geographically, I guess, dispersed. They had political divisions. There were people that were more pro-democracy, pro-Europe, and the people that just wanted things to kind of go towards Russia and kind of, I guess, create sort of a block with Russia again. Then they had a lot of human rights violations, which unfortunately are still going on today. There's been, recently there was a 27-page report, I believe, published by the Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International, detailing all of the human rights violations that are still occurring today, including kidnappings and murders and censoring of the media, a lot of discrimination against the Tatars, which are a small Muslim minority. They're not allowed to have any land. A lot of things have been taken away from them. So essentially, it's not a very good situation. And then during this time, they had the illegitimate authorities, which essentially was the paramilitary groups of the Russians that would come in and dictate what was going to be happening in Crimea. Recently, after speaking with some family, I learned that that is still going on. Maybe not to the extent that it had been going on before, but there are still military groups in Ukraine. So Ukraine also had a lot of economic issues. PPP was only 21% of that of the EU. Their political crisis, the one that happened, had caused their currency to slide by nearly 30%. So at this point in time, their economy is pretty much destroyed, and they don't really know where to turn and what to do. So, kind of getting to the meat of the argument, these are the parallels that I drew between Latvia and Ukraine to make the argument that they're very similar in social, political, and economic nature, and because of that, it's possible that Ukraine will follow a similar path to accession into the EU as Latvia did. They both have the Soviet influence because they're both post-Soviet countries. They have the ethnic divisions, they have corrupt leaders, and they have failing economies. And Latvia had experienced all this and had eventually gotten onto the path into the EU. And I'm hopeful that eventually, when the time will come, Ukraine will be able to as well. These are the expected benefits of Ukraine. They were kind of difficult to find at first, but obviously there will be an establishment of some form of human rights, because if the European comes in, they will encourage the establishment of human rights. There would be a decrease in Russia's threat, which I'm a little hesitant to say because no one is exactly sure how Russia would react. But judging on history, they didn't exactly go after the Baltic states once they had ascended into the EU, so I'm hopeful that there would be some deal worked out. There would also be a lot of economic benefits to help Ukraine out of this slum. It would be expected that the aggregate trade would increase by a minimum of 10%, and this is important because the EU is actually Ukraine's largest trading partner, and the Ukraine accounted for 32% of the EU's trade in 2005. So they do have a lot of dialogue going on, even though it might not be political or social. They do have a lot of economic dialogue going on, and I think that there's a lot of room to work together. So I guess the last question is there hope? Is this possible? Can Ukraine ascend into the EU given the situation today and not a year ago? I know that a lot of ethnically Ukrainian individuals are interested in democracy, are interested in joining the European Union, and I know that a lot of people in Ukraine are just tired of the situation, even regardless of whether they want Russia's influence. I mean, I'm pretty sure we wouldn't want some country having paramilitary groups here, essentially regulating everything, building a military base and not really keeping us in the loop. But unfortunately, even though I would love Ukraine to join the EU, the circumstances where it stands now, it's not going to be possible in the immediate future. I think that first we need to consider outside international actors' involvement. So perhaps the UN or the United States or someone to kind of help nudge Ukraine in the right direction and make them feel that they're confident to go forward. Thank you.